Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another edition of Newsflash Podcast. Before I bring up our guest, I just want to say once again, thank you all so much for tuning in. Please share this live stream far and wide. I want to remind people that if you're watching, please give some questions. If you have questions, please pop them in the live chat and tag the news with Joe Emilio so that I can see them. And I'll allow for a Q&A section. Well, I think this whole stream is pretty much going to be a Q&A. But this stream has come about because one of the most, well, it is now the most viewed video on my channel. I have you guys to thank for that. It was the No More Race Laws, ? South Africa's IRR takes a stand. And it blew up and it went crazy, and I'm very, very, very happy about that. I'm very happy that this news got out there, and because of the reaction, because of you guys commenting, I decided, hey, instead of me sitting there and trying to comment and try and give everybody reassurance and all that stuff, I thought, hey, why don't I get the guy who wrote the bill himself to come onto the show and chat to you guys and give you some more details, and we can address some of the concerns that you guys had in that video. With all that being said, ladies and gentlemen, here is the IRR's very own Hermann Pretorius. Hermann, welcome to the show.
Joe, it is such a pleasure to be with you, and I must say I'm pleased that our little bill could rack up those numbers for you. That is what I call a win-win.
It is definitely a win-win, man. So yeah, thank you guys so much for the work that you guys do. Just very quickly, in case people don't know who you are, just give a brief introduction of who is Hermann Pretorius exactly.
Right. So I'm the head of strategic communications for the South African Institute of Race Relations, and it's an odd job, but it is one I enjoy. And my main responsibilities are essentially to figure out how far ideas travel, what makes ideas travel further, and what makes ideas fail, and then to try and apply that to the work that the Institute does. But all of us at the Institute are analysts and researchers. I've got a law degree. I've got a degree in opera singing, which is the obvious part of I guess political commentary and law. Is those three things? What do they have in common? Well, a love of unnecessary drama. You never avoid conflict. Love the sound of your own voice, and you avoid Wagner where you can. But the Institute is really the interesting entity between me and the Institute. It's quite an amazing place to work at. It was established in 1929 to essentially understand, study, promote, improve race relations in South Africa from what is called a classical liberal perspective. Now, I know the word liberal has received a bad rap over the years. It has been co-opted by the progressives and the left, and it's not the greatest word in the South African lexicon. But classical liberals like the IRR believe that the individual within society must have as much freedom as possible. We believe in limited government. We believe in non-racialism. We believe in the free market. We believe in the rule of law. All freedom of speech. All these, I think, good stuff that the liberals of today, other the progressive liberals, would do well to remember. But that moniker is a controversial and a contentious one. But since 1929, the Institute has studied and advocated for improved race relations in South Africa. And part of that is, of course, non-racialism. In 1946, a young woman called Helen Suzman represented the IRR at the Fagan Commission, which was a commission created by Prime Minister Jan Smuts to investigate the feasibility of race-based legislation like the pass laws. And this was a few years after Smuts, at a meeting with the IRR in 1941, told the IRR that racial segregation had run its course, which is a weird way of saying it's a terrible idea. And then when apartheid really got started in the late 40s, the Institute started publishing socioeconomic data on the policy implications of the socialist and race-based policies of the National Party. And it started publishing the annual South Africa survey, which is still in print today, that we publish every year, which essentially became the Bible for socioeconomic data on understanding policy consequences in South Africa. And it gained such prominence that in the Rivonia trial, Mandela quoted from the South Africa survey of the IRR to emphasize, illustrate, show how the race-based policies and the socialist policies of apartheid were really damaging to the fabric of South Africa. And then we can sort of fast forward to the 1990s, when people started saying, look, the new constitution is coming, you non-racialists, you can go home, you've done your duty. And the CEO of the institute at the time, John Kemp Berman, the late great John Kemp Berman, knew that the ANC had since the mid-50s developed an unhealthy love of them socialists, where before the institute, the ANC was very much a non-ideological, non-racial organization that chased the democratic franchise less than any real economic policy. But John Kemp Berman and a few liberals at the time understood that there was something lurking in the ANC that could come roaring back. And boy, has it come roaring back. We see the National Democratic Revolution reinvigorated, and the Institute is perhaps the longest running opponent, the longest running hunting dog on the scent of the MDR and the ANC. So we are by no means a dead dog, but we're an old dog with some experience, some scars, and some stories to tell.
Yeah, and I'm glad you went through that brief history, because there's actually a question which I'll get to later in the comments. So what I did was I went through some of the comments in the video that I mentioned earlier, and I just jotted down a few that I thought would be nice to address. And one of them, well, you kind of just touched on the answer, but there's a little bit more, so I'll give more context later. But thank you for that awesome brief history of the IRR, and I think it's important for people to know that, because there are some misconceptions in the comment section of that video that think that the IRR is, for whatever reason, like 10 years old, when in matter of fact, like you just said, it's years old, and was there to fight apartheid. But anyway, we'll get into that a little bit more in a bit. I just want to welcome everybody that's joined. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Once again, my guest is Hermann Pretorius from the IRR. He's the guy who wrote the bill, which we're going to discuss in just a moment. Also, ladies and gentlemen, the bill is, the link to the petition to sign is in the description at the moment. If you haven't signed it, please go sign it. And I think that's a good segue, Hermann, into this bill, and we could chat about this bill. So I think where we should probably start, I'm gonna give you two questions. Don't worry if you forget the second question; we can always come back to it. But I think I just want to kind of guide you as to where this is headed. So, I'd like to know what inspired you, what made you want to write a bill like this, or the IRR specifically, and then maybe you can also address, like, what I noticed, one of the most pressing concerns in the comment section. I don't know how many times this was commented in various variations, but the message was the same, which was basically that if this bill can actually go through, there's concerns that the ANC is going to stop it, and that petitions don't work, and so on and so forth. So it was around that nature. So yeah, what inspired you to do the bill, and what confidence do you have that this bill can go through, that this bill can actually instill change in South Africa?
So what inspired the bill is difficult to pinpoint exactly. In 2022, it was the country sort of silently commemorated 100 years of race-based labor legislation, with the 1922 Apprenticeships Act being the first real race-based employment law in South Africa. Of course, it was aimed at benefiting white people, Afrikaner people, more specifically in the political space of the time. But since 2022, this idea has been in my mind that almost for 100 years there's been this silent assumption that the state can legally, statutorily classify people by race. And that was codified formally in 1950 in the 1950 Act, the Population Registration Act, which the IRR at the time and in later research, here I've got a pamphlet from 1985 from the IRR, where it
Wow.
has a brief discussion of what is apartheid. And there's a bit of an introduction, and then part two is basic apartheid laws and terminology, and then it lists a few key building blocks of the entire apartheid system. And the first one listed is the Population Registration Act of 1950. It says this law provides for the classification of the entire population of South Africa according to certain defined racial categories and subdivisions thereof. The Act lays down that appearance or general acceptance by the community may be taken into account in classifying people where there is doubt as to which official group they belong to. It also provides for reclassification in certain circumstances. Now, if that gives you a bit of the creeps in terms of the Nuremberg laws of Nazi Germany, of when someone was enough of a Jew to be hated by the Nazis, it should, because the apartheid government took shameless inspiration from those laws. You can look at some of the remarks of someone like John Forster, who at the time was an unapologetic advocate of Nazism, Mussolini's fascism, and to his mind, the apartheid philosophy was the Afrikaner equivalent of that. So there was something incredibly sinister in the Population Registration Act, which birthed the pencil test, because one of the areas that in that act allowed people to be classified as black or white was stuff like hair texture and the facial bone structure, which in the end led to people of the same family, brothers and sisters that have just, the luck of the draw or the unluck of the draw, had certain features being divided by the race classification boards created by the Act into different categories. And mercifully, that Act, with all its Nuremberg echoes, was repealed in 1991. So since 1991, the South African state has not had the legal capacity, ability, eyes to look at a South African and say, you are a black person because these are the criteria I can apply to you and come to the conclusion that you are black or white or whatever the case may be. So the state since 1991 has been legally colorblind, and yet, as our research fellow Martin van Staden shows in his Race Law Index, more than 117 race-based laws have been passed since 1994. Laws that assume the government, the state, has the right to define when someone is black, when someone is white. And that just tickled me, that how about we challenge that for once? We've got the ANC losing their political dominance a year ago. We've got the polling that indicates public opinion on BEE is genuinely shifting for the better. We've got positive race relations. I mean, the IRR, for the last 10 years at least that I know of, we've been doing annual opinion polling, where we ask South Africans, have you been the victim of racism in the last 5 years? And 63% of South Africans in our most recent survey, November last year, said no, they haven't. A majority of South Africans say race relations since 1994 have improved. 87% of South Africans say the races of South Africa need each other for the country to succeed. All of this just started getting me to think, my word, let's make this more concrete. Let's make this tangible, this good sense, this moderation, this non-racialism, this conciliatory attitude that I think most South Africans experience on a daily basis. Let's start asking the awkward questions. And I wrote this bill as an answer to the Population Registration Act, to say to the apartheid, oh, hear me, that's a Freudian slip, to say to the ANC government that either you bring back the cornerstone law of apartheid or you do away with the race-based policies you espouse, do away with BEE, do away with the COVID era idea that if you are black enough, you get support from the government, and fundamentally do away with a system that shouldn't stand for black economic empowerment, but blatant elite enrichment, because it is based on the bizarre, not only is it based on illegal and statutorily flimsy racial classification, it's also based on the magical thinking that if you make a millionaire in Sandton a bit richer, some black people in Shoshanguve should feel less poor. That's BEE in a nutshell. And I just thought, let's challenge the heart of this. Let's make concrete, and let's put a bit of bite and into this argument of non-racialism, and really create this binary of either bring back the Population Registration Act, own that you want to bring back that apartheid era cornerstone law, or actually admit you've got it wrong. You can't just classify people by race. You can't be the Verwoerd, the Forster, the Malan, the Strydom of the 21st century and go, oh, pencil go in here, pencil comes out of here, go stand in that queue.
Yeah, 100%. And I think all South Africans, especially since that race index, I had Martin and David Ansara on the show to talk about the race index, and we went through it and how these racial laws hurt South Africans more than anything else. And Martin even went through the terminology that the ANC uses these days, because it's not just saying like, because they don't say it blatantly, right? They don't say like, oh, white people are not allowed to be part of this. They use terminology like transformation or previously disadvantaged groups, BE, so on and so forth, which all is code for, well, if you're not of a certain color, you're not going to have access to this, which is
And
a racial law.
to and what makes it actually worse for me than just saying this is an anti-white law, this is a pro-black law, is that is the vibe they want to create. But even the vibe is a lie,
Yeah,
because
100%.
the majority of black South Africans have not benefited from BEE. BEE is structured in such a way that only once you are plugged into the economy at a relatively sophisticated level can you benefit from the BEE gravy train. You have to be able to step into a certain level of economic sophistication. There's an assumption of a certain financial state, a certain connection to industry on which BEE operates, saying that you can tender for this contract or that contract with the benefit of being black. But the problem is, most black South Africans aren't even in that position to start saying, you know what, I'm black, let me tender. It's a cynical usage of poverty created along racial lines by apartheid to enrich continuously a politically connected elite that is both black and white. If we go look at the data and we see who's benefited from BEE, it's been, I mean, you get the white BEE beneficiaries, you get the black BEE beneficiaries, but the thing that they have in common is that they are elite, cadre, crook, comrade, connected crony capitalism segment. It isn't even as crude as this is pro-black and anti-white. It's even worse than that, because at least that would be honest. That would be an honest, refreshing sort of DF Malan style of racism. I am against you because of the color of your skin. This is worse. This is, I'm going to use the suffering of people with my skin color elsewhere to pretend that their suffering is mine and pretend that my wealth is theirs.
100%. And just a reminder to people watching, because I see some questions coming in, I am keeping an eye on the questions. I am marking them, and we will get to them during the show. So rest assured that I'm keeping an eye on the questions. I just have one more kind of like a follow-up question to what you just said, Herman, about the bill. So can you very briefly, if I said to you, I know it might be a bit difficult, but in quick fire bullet point form, what to you are the most important, or is the most important thing, and maybe one or two, maybe a few things that people should know about this bill that you think will get them to go, shit, I want to help, I want to sign that petition because this bill sounds great. So what is the most important takeaways from this bill?
So let me answer that question and try to, in a very sneaky and suave way, answer a previous question as well. The first thing I want people to know about this bill is we're serious about it. The question about it'll never pass, it'll never work. We've heard that, and I can tell you the obfuscation of the ANC isn't something that's new to me or my colleagues. This is, I have a wonderful, legendary colleague, Dr. Anthea Jeffrey, who probably understands the ANC better than the ANC understands itself.
Love her.
And she is genuinely one of the great South Africans. And you know, she imbues her colleagues to a large extent, and the history of the IRR makes it very clear to us that we're not pretending that the ANC is a debating team we're opposed to. It's more fundamental than that. Yes, this law is serious. I've already spoken to parliamentarians who wanted to introduce this law, and in Parliament, and I've asked them to not do so yet, because what people should understand is, even though it is intangible and invisible, the Parliament of Public Opinion is the number one legislative body in any country. There's a wonderful Abraham Lincoln quote which says that, I can't remember the exact wording, but it comes down to the fact that public sentiment is everything. With it, nothing can fail, and against it, nothing can succeed. So the bill's front page, I very deliberately wrote that it wasn't introduced to the Parliament of South Africa, it was introduced to the people of South Africa, because that is the first legislative chamber in which this bill needs to succeed or fail. That's why I don't think this is a short sprint. This is a marathon. This is making sure that we have the votes on the ground in South Africa. The first parliamentary chamber is always the public. So we're not thinking, let's get this to Parliament, let's get it through the committee stage, let's get it to a plenary session, let's get it through. Oh, drat, the ANC thwarted us. We are going upstream from that, and I have a tendency to sort of dip into annoyingly tedious history, so you must stop me if I do that too much. But I want to give people an idea about how we shouldn't be chauvinistic in our historical understanding. And what I mean with chauvinistic is not the, misogyny, male. It is thinking that our position is superior or unique from other positions. Now, historical chauvinism would be to say non-racialism in South Africa has never faced a worse opponent than the ANC at the moment. And that might be true, but one of my favorite little factoids that motivates me is that in August 1985, P.W. Botha delivered the Rubicon speech. I think it was 15th of August. He doubles down on apartheid. And I spoke to Pik Botha a few years ago before he died, and he said that him and his cabinet colleagues were caught off guard by the intensity of Botha's doubling down. The whole idea of the Rubicon was introduced but as a sort of a symbol of we're crossing this river, and the Rubicon River around Rome was meant as the point of dissolving your army before you head into the Republic capital. But Botha took the Rubicon historical example of Caesar, where you cross the Rubicon with your forces, with your army. This is the point of no return. You are dedicating yourself to a power grab. So when he gave the Rubicon speech, doubling down on apartheid, even his cabinet ministers thought, well, that's the end. That's the end of reform. This is the beginning of a civil war. This is the beginning of a war of attrition that the ANC will escalate, and that P.W. Botha will be willing to escalate in turn. And then fast forward to May and June 1995, less than 10 years later, you have Nelson Mandela, who at the time of the Rubicon speech was public enemy number one, the Osama bin Laden of the apartheid government. Less than 10 years after the Rubicon speech, he walks onto the pitch at Ellis Park with 40,000, mostly white, mostly Afrikaner, mostly men, chanting Nelson, Nelson, Nelson. Less than 10 years. Now, Joe, if I think what was 10 years ago, 2015 was 10 years ago, if I think that historical time frame is representative of apartheid going from probably its most entrenched moment to its utter decimation symbolically with the William Webb Ellis Trophy moment with Francois Pienaar and Nelson Mandela, I would say to people that paradigmatic change, like the sort of change the No More Race Laws Bill is advocating, happens slowly and then suddenly. But if you don't start pushing on the slowly, you never get to the suddenly. So we are not naive in thinking that this bill has an easy route to Parliament, but it has one. And the people of South Africa, already we are pushing 10,000 signatures on that petition, and the bill is a week old. So
Awesome.
if we can mobilize the people of South Africa to say, yes, I like that, that bill has my seal of approval, we can do something that the Americans actually do very well. And that is sort of this legislative based activism, where it is this call your congressman, call your senator, and get them to support this bill. Otherwise, you're not a patriot. Or something like that. Was a horrible American accent. I do
No, it
apologize.
wasn't
I've
bad
done that.
actually. It wasn't bad.
I'll try my Texas one with the words kind
Yeah,
of lean on
I don't
me.
know why you got to go southern,
Um,
but okay.
Yes. So the Americans have this idea of legislative activism. They understand that if you introduce a law, you put politicians on the spot. You don't allow them to wiggle away in the, oh, well, let's see. And that's what we're trying to do here. So we are serious about this bill. That's the first thing that people should know about it. The second thing people should know about it is that it is unashamedly an answer to the Population Registration Act. Without going into the boring detail, but if we are going to take two legal points, number one, that the Population Registration Act would not pass constitutional muster in the 1996 and after constitutional period. We have to agree that the Population Registration Act, if measured against the 1996 Constitution framework, would fail. It must, because the entire constitutional dispensation was a response to the political and structural system that the Population Registration Act introduced. So if we assume that the Population Registration Act, by its nature, must be unconstitutional, we need to ask why it is. And it is, in terms of Section 9 of the Constitution, because it is unfair racial discrimination. So if we want something like fair racial discrimination, which the Constitution allows for and which I agree with, I think fair discrimination is something that we should acknowledge. If a Christian school wants to appoint a Christian, it is fair discrimination to appoint a Christian. If a Jewish or an Islamic school the same. It's a form of fair discrimination. If Clint Eastwood wants to make a film about Mandela, it's fine that he doesn't cast me. I'm not tall enough to play Mandela. And of course I'm not black enough, and that's fair discrimination. So if we can think that there's something like fair discrimination and there's something like unfair discrimination, and the Population Registration Act must have fallen in the unfair discrimination category, then the opposite of the Population Registration Act, or something recognizably different from it, must represent the type of racial discrimination that is fair. And the Population Registration Act was state enforced. So fair racial discrimination would be based on voluntary racial classification. The Population Registration Act was mandated, enforced, but also defined and carried out by the state. The opposite of that would be self-racial definition. For someone to go, I'm white and proud of it, or I am black and proud of it, or I'm a colored and proud of it. This law doesn't affect that. It just says that it's not the state's job, like under the Population Registration Act, to decide when you fit into which box. And the third way in which it must be different from the Population Registration Act is any consequences of your decision to categorize yourself voluntarily. Whether explicit or implicit, these consequences can't be detrimental or beneficial, because that's what the Population Registration Act did. The Population Registration Act sorted people into racial categories to dole out benefits and disadvantages. The opposite of that, or at least something that is markedly different from that, is the only sort of racial classification that can pass constitutional muster. So that's the second thing, is it is a deliberate juristic attempt to fill a legal vacuum of saying the Constitution allows for fair racial discrimination. What does that look like? And this law answers it for the first time since 1996. And then the third thing, and that I think people should know about this law, is it is uncompromising. It removes, repeals, amends all race laws. Whether it is an apartheid era law that someone forgot about that benefits white people, or whether it or nominally benefits white people, that's gone. And how we make it gone is by point number 4, is the bill creates a non-racial DOGE. It creates the non-racial compliance unit within the government to ensure non-racialism across the board, and it criminalizes any state official practicing racial classification that is not covered by fair racial discrimination, and it criminalizes racial discrimination. So those are the 4 things I would want people to take away from this. We're serious about it. We're going to fight this. It's not going to be quick, but it's going to be long, and we're putting in the work. Number 2, it is a direct rebuttal of the thinking of the Population Registration Act, and it is done studiously with legal complexity and integrity in mind. Thirdly, it is uncompromising in how it deals with the laws on the statute books. And fourthly, it has teeth. It is not going to say, oh, let's all love each other, non-racialism is going to happen. No, no, no. We are going to make sure that those state officials who use their power to discriminate on the basis of race will face a fine or a prison sentence, or both. If people take those 4 things away from this law, I think it would be a fair reflection.
Yeah, and I'm very glad you summarized it that way. I think people need to understand that. People need to uh, understand that this is not a quick fix. And I know a lot of people, like, I think people get really excited about it, and they want it to happen tomorrow. They want to see IRR bust the door in at Parliament all dramatically and say, we're pushing through this bill whether you like it or not, because the people have spoken. And I think, like, you use the example of Mandela and the 10-year time frame. I think y'all can do it in a sooner time, because back when Mandela was on his soapbox, there was no social media. There was no Facebook or Twitter or TikTok or any one of those. And so the information can get to people way faster now, and across the board. across the country, and I hope that more and more people will share the video that I made, share this stream, and let people know about it. And I think no matter what, there are going to be the cynical people. There are going to be the ones that have lost hope, and there's a few of them already in the comment section. I'm seeing now in the live stream. Oh, it's never going to go through. The ANC is going to thwart it or whatever, blah blah. And that's fine. You can have that opinion, but I always say this to people when it comes to this kind of stuff, and I think I mentioned it in the video. We got to try to have this defeatist attitude. Eh, no great change has happened in any country that's had a defeatist attitude. If you just throw up your hands and say it's never going to happen, well then you're you're part of the losing team. You have to at least try.
And more than that, um, the ANC will always block it. Are you assuming the immortality of the ANC? Because that would come as shocking news to the ANC at the moment. They are
That's also
smelling
true.
the stench of death is starting to cling to this movement, and we shouldn't be historically chauvinistic about this. There are a few recent examples of political parties being immensely powerful and disappearing. We don't have to even go back to the era of William Gladstone and the Liberals that went from dominating Victorian politics to gone by the 1920s essentially, and then dead by the 1930s, effectively dead. We can look at the 1993 Canadian election, where the Conservatives at the time went from a majority government to, I think, but I can't remember if it's 3 or 6 seats. They went from a majority to the low single digits in a single election cycle. And if Canadian politics isn't your flavor, let's look a bit closer to home. Who would have said in 1992, with F.W. de Klerk riding a massive wave of popularity, that the National Party, the behemoths political engine behind apartheid, would be dead and buried by 2006? Gone. Nothing left of it. So the assumption, oh, the ANC will block it, is I'm afraid, historically chauvinistic. It is assuming that history in the past doesn't hold truths for today. The opinion polling from the Social Research Foundation, which I rate highly, find that not only is the ANC on 32% at the moment, but if a next election were to be held without Cyril Ramaphosa, the party would fall to 21%. And the DA would rise to 28%, the EFF would rise to 9% from their current 6 in the polling, and MK would rise to 15%. 21%, an ANC of 21% is going to block a bill that we are trying to get through the parliament of a few million. Oh, come on. That it is a defeatist attitude that not only sacrifices any possibility of change, but it is actually a defeatist attitude that ignores the factual reasons not to be defeatist. And I think that's silly. Pardon me for being a bit dismissive, but it's silly. I love this country. I don't want to be anywhere else. If I'm going to spend my life fighting for this bill, I would consider that worth it. Sometimes the grass is greener on the other side because there's more shit about. I'm not going anywhere. And if I'm not going anywhere, that means that I have a 10-month-old son now. He deserves a father who won't give up on this, not this country, not this place that I genuinely love, that I call home, and that I want him to call home. So I don't take the defeatists seriously. I think they misread history, and I think they misread the current political moment.
Excellently said. I agree with you 100%. I'm a father of two. Also, have a young boy. He's 10 weeks old, and I look at my kids and I'm like, it's why I do this channel. It's why I talk about this stuff. It's my way of helping and informing people. And if we don't try again, if we don't try, I I've always said this. I can't I can't personally. When my son is 10 and my daughter is 12, or when they're older, when they're in their teens or when they're adults, and maybe the country's gone to shit, who knows? Um, and they look at me and they say, "Dad, what did you do?" I
Yeah.
want to be able to say that I tried. Just to look at them and say, "Oh, I just gave up. Sorry, now you have a shit
And
country." It's I can't live with myself with that.
absolutely, and there's no reason to give up. I think that's the thing that gets me most, is there's everything to play for.
Yeah,
We've just, for the first time in about 100 years, emerged from single party dominance. In 2012, when my former boss Franz Cornier wrote an opinion piece or wrote an analysis for the IRR in 2012, saying in 2024 the ANC will lose its majority, the IRR was laughed at.
yeah,
I remember reading stuff from people who I respect. Samadora Fikeni, an academic and a political scientist I respect, and I can't remember if it was Ferro Haffiji, but people were
mm,
dismissive of this
yeah,
idea that the ANC could fall below 50% in 2024. In 2012, the IRR called it, and in 2024, the voters saw fit to say, IRR, you called it right. The idea that things are so set in stone that they can't change, that we can't fight for the movement to succeed, just I think it ignores. We don't even have to go to grand history. We can look at the bloody Snyder Cut
mm,
of Justice League. No, Snyder Cut would never come out. That was the studio's position. It would never be published. Enough public pressure, and it was.
mm-hmm,
We don't have to reach far into the social zeitgeist to understand that the greatest power, the greatest advantage of those in power is to tell the democratic echo box, the real parliament, that they are actually impotent. The
mm,
greatest favor you could do the ANC is to consider it undefeatable, because then it would win the
mm.
propaganda war in your mind. And yeesh, I don't want. I'm not buying that. I'm not buying that.
No, and we shouldn't. We absolutely shouldn't. You're right. Um, I think I'd like to just move on to one question, and then hopefully I can get to some of the questions that people have given. I don't think I'm going to be able to get to the one other. Well, we'll see. So, where is it? Just let me look for it. Okay, so um, there have been some voices on social media. I noticed it when I first advertised this stream, that the IRR's no race law bill closely mirrors the constitutional amendment draft previously released by the referendum party. Um, Both bills push the same thing to end race based laws and promote individual merit based empowerment. Just, I'm curious, was the IRR at all inspired by that proposal, or what the referendum party did? Or was it just a case of parallel thinking? You can answer that like very briefly.
Yeah, I genuinely think it's a case of parallel thinking. It's like Leibniz and Newton reaching algebra on both sides of the English Channel. Okay, my lighting just did something funky. It undid something funky. Perhaps I shouldn't mention the words Leibniz or Newton, or perhaps the trigger was English Channel. So Leibniz and Newton came to algebra on the same at the same time without any real connection. I saw a comment from the referendum party saying that they did this and they sent it to me. I'm pretty sure they did. I might have seen it. I don't know. But there's a wonderful quote by some sort of American guy, I can't remember, who said that the way to get things done is not to care about who gets the credit. If the referendum party wants to claim intellectual property rights over this thing, feel free. To me, it isn't about the branding. It is if and well done
Well,
to the referendum party for taking that initiative, and I have
yeah,
no problem with it. I'm not going to
I
pretend
actually, I
that this is a
actually,
novel
yeah,
brilliance
yeah.
from my
But
side.
like, I actually had a follow up question where I was actually going to ask, if they're both similar, have you maybe thought of like a collaboration? Maybe that a unification or collaboration for like in terms of a legal strategy, or Unfortunately, I know that the referendum party doesn't have seats in parliament. I think if they did, maybe
Mm.
that would be a bit more valuable. But I don't know. Maybe is that crossed your mind at all?
Well, now it has. But so no. The thing that I think people should understand, um, from a strategic and tactical basis, if you're taking on essentially communistic
Mm,
Afro-Marxist forces, is
yes.
it? And this is something that, God bless him, the F.W. de Klerk Foundation, I think, sometimes get wrong. Um, and that is this idea that we should unite to present a stronger opponent to the ANC. That, to me, that makes two fundamental mistakes. Number one is it is reducing a moral argument to a numbers game. It is saying we are right because we are now more than we were. In a way, it's saying that if we are enough in terms of banding together a few organizations, we can go toe to toe with the big guy, and that sort of immediately seeds that this is a big guy playground that we're in, and I don't buy that. I don't see the ANC as some behemoth that I must build a coalition to defeat. I just think we go upstream from politics. So I don't really, and this is perhaps the liberal in me, I don't really believe in over designed coordination. I do think that organic order gives you enough of a dynamism in the battle of ideas. But secondly, also, I don't like uniting efforts in general because it just creates one target instead of two. If
And
you
also,
were
you
two
might have
movement,
sorry. You also might have like too many chefs in the kitchen as well.
yes, yeah, possibly that, but it's more like let the referendum party do their thing, because I think we've got different lanes, we've got different
Mm,
perspectives on South Africa. We've got different audiences. I, for example, don't take Cape Independence terribly seriously. I mean, I, after all, work for the South African Institute of Race Relations. So I do sort of buy into the nation state, and people could criticize me for that, and that's it's a debate worth having, and I might be wrong, but I'm not someone who thinks that the referendum party is necessarily the vehicle for the ideas I want to promote.
mm,
But that's because I'm looking at it from my perspective.
yes.
Having them look at the issue from their perspective, not joining forces with me, disagreeing with me, finding their own way to advance their non-racialism. At the end of the day, I mean, I think it's separate paths to the non-racial end destination. So I have no bones with them. I have no gripes with them. I'll try and go look and find the draft law that they wrote and look at it, and give them kudos for that. But I would encourage South Africans to go, let's let's frustrate the enemy with how many targets we present them.
Yes. I think I can save you some time on that. I actually did look through both of the what you wrote and what they wrote. They are very similar. There's definitely some similarities, but at the end of the day, I think structurally they're different. And while some of the points are the same, there is a slight difference in terms of um, uh, basically like how do I say this? Um, Same end goal, different wording of how to get there, if that makes sense. So I mean, at the end of the day, I agree with you. It doesn't really matter if the RP can put it through or if IRR can put it through, and the end goal is the same. So be it. In that way, we're all on the same team. But I thought it was interesting. I saw the comment and I was like,
Mm.
oh, that's interesting. Um, Okay, moving back to some of the comments that were in the comment section and in the live stream now. I think some of the questions that were given now in the live stream you kind of answered with the previous question, not about the RP, the one before that. Um, but I actually there's a comment that I had on and these kind of comments make me giggle, Herman, because I'll read it to you. I'm sure you'll chuckle. You don't have to say anything to it. You can maybe give a small response, but here we go. I promise you, this is a real comment. Okay. The IRR, question mark. Bwahahahaha. No, wait. Bwahahahaha. The IRR is the agent of the bankers. Rothschild Consulting drafted by the BE framework. You didn't know that, did you? Who funds the IRR? They are not an they are not on anyone's side, but the elites outside of South Africa. Okay, I tell you I chuckle. The IRR supported lockdown, but pretended they were against it. Okay, they support divide and rule BE whilst creating it with their partners. I'm almost done. They are the most duplicitous race baiting manipulators in the southern hemisphere. Wow, you're worse than the ANC apparently. If you defend whiteness because someone made a law, you have fallen from the divide and rule trap. Someone groups you with a law, and you respond by question mark, question mark, question mark, playing into their hands, question mark. Stop looking down at the problem, look up. I know it's a mouthful. I know there was a lot said, but we had a bit of a chuckle.
Yes, there's a sort of poetry to it, and I hope the person has a stupendous career as a fiction author.
And then the other comment, which you kind of addressed earlier with your with the brief history you gave, is this one person I think was just trying to troll. Where was IRR during apartheid? IRR run by white people? Question mark. And today they are now colorblind? Question mark. We are not going to be fooled by white people in South Africa. Obviously, black nationalists.
Mm.
But you addressed
Yeah,
that
so
in the beginning.
um,
I think a lot of people don't realize, like I said earlier, that IRR fought against apartheid. I don't think people realize that. They get this wrong impression of it now for whatever reason.
yeah,
Yeah, but yeah,
so
it's
because we said to the National Party, look, guys, we think your race-based stuff is bad, and we think your state control of the economy is bad. My predecessors were considered lefty, commie, pinko homosexuals. And because we say to the ANC, look, chaps, we think your race-based stuff is bad, and we think your state interventions in the economy is destructive. Now we are a far right two-turn wearing, a MAGA Republicans who miss Eugene to Blanche. So it's fair for people to say that. What I do think is entertaining is the fact that the IRR hasn't moved one iota away from our founding principles. We've always been
yes,
non-racial. We've always been pro free markets and stuff like that. So people are free to criticize, but I do think it's ignorance more than anything doing the talking.
yeah,
And during apartheid, I think it is. I had this sort of back and forth with Matthew Parks of Kusatu the other day,
oh my
um,
word.
because apparently because the IRR's offices weren't bombed, we didn't fight apartheid.
What?
That ignores my predecessors who were literally arrested and abused by the police for writing stuff like this behind closed doors by Shireen Motala. Piece. It was written in again 1985, a study of deaths in detention in South Africa between August 1963 and 1984, and further deaths between June 84 and September 1985. Written by Shireen Motala, who was black, and edited by Francis Potter, who was white. So and they were abused for this. So I think it's more
Wow.
ignorance than anything else that people
Yeah.
get the IRR wrong. And frankly, if there's a we paid for Mandela's university studies actually. The IRR bursary program paid for Mandela's university studies, and I think technically he still owes us a few pounds, but who's keeping score? So the it's it's entertaining and it is chuckle worthy, but it is a bit of a nonsense. We're an institute with a proud history, and I think people who don't know where we were or where my predecessors were during apartheid just illustrate to the extent to which I think they've bought the line, hook, line, and sinker that apartheid was a battle between the ANC and everyone else. You had the Black Sash, you had the Liberals, some of who did great work. There's a book here somewhere by Robertson. Here we go. Liberalism in South Africa, 1948 to 1963, in which Janet Robertson um, writes about the path taken by liberalism, how the IRR effectively at the time, and the Liberal Party before it was unbanned, or before it was uh, uh, um, dissolved, how they worked with the ANC, how there were tensions with the ANC, between the ANC and the Liberals, especially from the 50s onwards because of the increasing socialist influence in the ANC, and the IRR, the Black Sash, all part of that liberal tradition. So if someone wants to know the truth about the liberal position, the IRR's position, I would encourage them to read Janet Robertson's Liberalism in South Africa from 1948 to 1963. Brilliant take, and it's proper history, not the type of propagandist nonsense that suddenly had this idea that non-racialism was birthed, born, and conceived one morning in February 1992.
All right, so if I can just borrow a little bit of more of your time, because we are
Of
running out
course.
of time, but I do want to get to some of the questions that have come in, and I want to try and get to the good ones. The first one, this isn't really a question, but I do have to address it. It's a super chat. Thank you so much for the super chat, 14 rand super chat, or Sasa chat as we call them on this channel. And I think he's saying buy a donkey. You guys are buy a donkey. You guys are awesome. Thank you, crazy Babuin. It's greatly appreciated for the super chat. Much appreciated. Okay, so let's see. Again, Rahil wanted to know, wouldn't the ANC just ignore this bill? How do we get them to even consider it or look at it? And I think there's a lot of questions like that. And I think what people are maybe concerned about is, okay, cool. Um, you get let's say you get 1 million signatures, hopefully. um, what's the next step after the signatures? How do you get? I know you keep saying public sentiment and public pressure and all that stuff. Okay, you have that now. How I think what people are worried about is that parties like the MK, EFF, or ANC, all the left-leaning ones, will probably wipe their bum with the bill. So how do we really get them to this? Let's fast forward 7 years from now.
So they are welcome to wipe their bums with the bill. I wrote it, so I know it is thoroughly absorbing. Um, the the question of wouldn't the ANC just ignore the bill? The problem with that question is the answer is sort of obvious. Yes, they of course they will ignore the bill. That's not the point of the bill. And it is similar to the noises that were made in the 1970s and 80s, saying, "Yeah, but the NP they'll never negotiate with the ANC." So it is again that expectation that paradigms don't shift. So that's the first part. And I think there's an over reliance on, the ANC will be in a position perpetually, forever and ever, to make or break this bill. Number two is, when we look at politics, I think it is irresponsible to limit politics to formal politics. If that were the case, if only formal politics, parliamentary elected politics, were the instrument of national political debate, then apartheid would never have fallen, because the tricameral parliament just would have excluded the ANC and the anti-apartheid forces from formal politics, and that would have been enough. But the problem is that apartheid started collapsing because of not public sentiment, but public action. There's a do I have it here? I don't I don't see it at the moment, but Walter E. Williams wrote an exceptional book called South Africa's War on Capitalism. Ah, yes, South Africa's up, or was it Apartheid's War on Capitalism? One of those two, in which he exposes the extent to which white businesses in the 1970s and early 80s, I think, um, became essentially disobedient to apartheid legislation, because apartheid legislation was economically quite statist and socialist, in the sense that it tried to socially engineer the workforce to be white. And the problem with that is that the workforce of white people in South Africa was simply not big enough for businesses to operate. So businesses at the time would continuously find loopholes to hire black people, not because they were these paragons of non-racial virtue. It's just because they were business owners and they wanted to be able to make and sell products. And apartheid laws were in the way of making and selling products. Um, and what changed the from apartheid to the fall of it wasn't formal politics. And it wasn't even electoral politics, because we must remember that the same party that instituted apartheid also instituted negotiations with the ANC. So it wasn't magically as if, oh, the ANC was elected and then Frederik van Zyl Slabbert became prime minister or president, and then there was negotiations with the ANC. Far from it. It was the National Party who responded to its own support base, going, Garels, this isn't working. This isn't feasible. This isn't in line with the South Africa that we want. If I'm a business person and I've got a law saying to me that 7 out of 10 uh, potential employers or employees in the country I can't hire because they're not the right color, I'm going to tell them to essentially piss off. I've got a business to run. So the question comes from, number one, don't assume that paradigms are entrenched. That's the first thing that would scupper any attempt to change the trajectory of South Africa. Number two, formal politics isn't the only form of politics, as our history shows, and as it happens, the fall of Jacob Zuma shows. Why did Jacob Zuma go? Did he lose an election? Not really. He went because public opinion just turned against him. Why? Because he was bad for business, because he was bad for the ANC. The ANC could see themselves losing the election in 2019 if they stuck with Zuma for much longer. Then
Much
we move
like you
on to
said
the
now, sorry, much like what you said now is happening with Cyril, in a
yeah,
way.
exactly. Exactly. So, and by the way, the ANC is in a terrible mess. They've never been in this position. They've never been in this position where, number one, their greatest electoral asset and liability is their leader. In the past, there was always been a very neat shift from Mbeki being electoral asset to electoral liability, they get rid of him. Zuma being electoral asset until he was a liability, get rid of him. The problem with Cyril is he is both their strongest electoral asset and their strongest electoral liability at the moment, and there isn't an heir presumptive, and which there's always been for the ANC. So the ANC isn't this the big beast of the kennel that people might think they are. So don't think yourself against a wall with the ANC as this vast opponent. Of course, they're still formidable. This isn't going to be a quick fight, but they're not immortal. And then there's the point of just the the fact that it isn't working. It isn't working. What's going on now, like apartheid, it's not working. People are poor and they're staying poor. And if what white South Africans quite often misunderstand is that no one needs to tell black South Africans how bad the ANC is. They know that better than most. They've been on the receiving end of compromised service delivery, because instead of 100% of the allocated funds going to service delivery, 20, 30, 40% was a carve out for BEE. The people of South Africa who are most aware of the failures of the ANC aren't, white liberal middle class people like myself. And that is what I talk about when I think about the parliament of public opinion. Is political parties are in the end Darwinistic creatures. They do want to survive. If they lose that ability and that instinct to survive, they die. So the idea is to go upstream from the next two elections, three elections, to go upstream from the next two or three parliamentary terms, and to buy the time that the parliament is ready to consider this bill, whether it's in 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, I don't know. But by the time they do it, it will be with such a clear public opinion, such a mobilized and engaged public opinion, that they will be unable to vote against it. And again, little dip into history. Why was Trevor Manuel effectively a Thatcherite Minister of Finance? Well, quite simply because Mbeki, when the ANC came to power in 1994 and gained access to the fiscus for the first time, they saw that there was nothing left. They wanted to govern as centre-left social democrats. They wanted a generous welfare state, and they wanted the state to fund it. The apartheid economy was so horrendous by the 80s, and couldn't recover quick enough in the 90s on the sort of upward swing dividend of change, that by the time they got into government, there was nothing left. There wasn't the funds, the money available for the ANC to be social democrats. And it was Mbeki who said to his party, look, guys, we can either pretend we have the money and spend it, and then go into debt, into a sovereign debt crisis, and approach the IMF for a bailout, and become the liberation movement that couldn't govern. We would shame the ANC of a almost century old because we weren't able to govern. We would go begging to the Western IMF powers. We could either do that, or we can be pragmatic in the short term, be economically free market, economically liberal, and fiscally conservative, and ensure that we get a growing economy that can support our centre-left policies. So the entire change from a socialist ANC to a momentary non-socialist ANC under Mbeki's influence was the ANC's response to non-formal political pressure forces. And that's why we go upstream from politics. The fear of the ANC falling into an IMF bailout was a pressure upstream from politics. It wasn't a pressure at the ballot box. It wasn't a pressure in parliamentary debate. It was a more existential pressure that the ANC didn't want to attempt, or couldn't resist. And that is what we want to do, is go upstream from what is currently forming public opinion, and ensure that by the time this thing goes to parliament, it is it is a politically Darwinistic act for political parties to vote for it, because to vote against it would be to vote for more of the same, to vote for the type of exploitative policies of BEE or the 1922 Apprenticeships Act.
Yeah, I think it's very well said. And again, it's unfortunate. Like, not unfortunate. Sorry, it's just the way the world works. People have to be patient, but people have to support it, because if they don't support it, then there won't be change. But you said now it's been a week out, 10,000 signatures. That's amazing, and I hope that people will continue to support it. Like I said, the link is in the description. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to get to all the questions that have come in, but there is one that is interesting. Proud Pets says, why doesn't the IRR start a political party?
Um, because we've got better things to do, frankly. I I've spent a bit of time in politics, and I have many friends who are in politics, who are politicians, and some people who aren't friends but who I still respect. And I think politics gets both a bad rap for people just dismissing it as cynicism. I know some genuinely good people who are in politics for the right reasons.
Mm,
Um, but if it's I don't think it's the space always for fundamental change to start.
mm,
It's quite often the place for fundamental change to end up, but it's not the place for fundamental change to start. So
mm,
I think we've got better stuff to do and a better way to do it rather than in informal politics. And perhaps something that I could sort of touch on is, if you people ask, why is there this relationship, this historical linkage, this closeness between the DA and the IRR? And the best way I could answer that is to say, well, the IRR writes recipes and the DA is a restaurant. And the owners of the restaurant sometimes happen to like our recipes. And that's what think tanks are supposed to do. They are supposed to write the recipes because someone has to. If you look at fascistic movements and coup d'etats, what are the first points of power takeover that the strong men, the coups always go for? It's the telecoms infrastructure, it's the
mm,
radio stations, it's the television. And why do those matter? Because it's the ideas space. It's the space where ideas are born. Like, this is crap, or how about we do something else? So we don't start a political party because it's it's something for someone else to do. We will work with any political party. And let me give you a quick example tactically that I discussed with my team earlier today as to why politics and think tankery is different, even though it has overlaps. Pierre Poilievre in Canada, conservative leader there, became leader after the Conservatives had lost three consecutive elections. Stephen Harper was defeated by Justin Trudeau, and then um, Scheer and O'Toole, I think it was Andrew Scheer and Aaron O'Toole, were two leaders of the Canadian Conservative Party, um, that just couldn't make the breakthrough. The Liberals, which I would contest whether they're actual Liberals, they're more progressives, under Trudeau kept winning, and the Conservative leaders kept falling until Poilievre came about, and he just had a messaging ability to counter Trudeau in such an effective way. And he built himself up as the anti-Trudeau. And as the Liberals under Trudeau saw their support dip, the Conservatives saw their support rise, to the point where earlier this year, January this year, the Conservatives were 20 points ahead in the polls. And part of that was the very unpopular carbon tax that Trudeau had introduced and hiked up. And what Poilievre had managed to do was to consistently, like, really surgically popularize the phrase, it's time for a carbon tax election, carbon tax election, carbon tax election, which was sort of sensible at the time because there was an election imminent in 2025. If you keep calling for a carbon tax election and there suddenly is an election, people are going to go, oh, good, it's the carbon tax election we've wanted. But what then pulled the rug from under Poilievre's feet was Trudeau resigned, the Liberals elected Mark Carney, and one of the first things Mark Carney did as Prime Minister was to dump the carbon tax. And the carbon tax had become the entire engine of Poilievre's attempt to bulldoze the Conservatives into a majority and get rid of the Liberals. If we were the IRR and we were saying, let's call a BEE on a no more race laws election, and we were to be a political party seeking to win an election, and we call for a no more race laws election, we call for a no more race laws election, and then there comes an election, and Cyril Ramaphosa, whoever is president of the ANC at the time, says, oh, we're scrapping race laws. If we were a political party, we would see a rug pull of our entire operation. We would be in Poilievre's shoes. We would go, oh, crap, we can't win power. Our entire argument is falling apart. But because we're a think tank, if we can call for a no more race laws election, until there is an election, and the ANC leader goes, crap, we're going to lose this election. The IRR has managed to make it a race laws election. The only thing for us is to dump race laws. Instead of being panicked that we're not going to win the election, the IRR will go home with a bit of a spring in our step that evening because we'd achieved the goal. There's a difference between a political party and a think tank, even though they do both try to win public support. The political party has a vested interest. It must win power. We don't want to win power. We want to win the battle of ideas. And it requires more nimbleness, more patience, and just a similar but different approach.
Yeah. I listen. I dabbled a little bit into politics, very, 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 very little into politics last year? I think it was last year, or during the election. Yeah, during the elections last year. Was it last year? I can't remember.
Yeah.
And yeah, it wasn't for me. Um, and I think being on the sideline, a commentator, and be in your case being a think tank, I think think tanks and civil society organizations do more good for the South African people than politicians do, if I'm completely honest. I really
And
do
if
think and believe that.
and if you want proof of that, look at the fact that Parliament burnt down and no one gave a shit. The English, for 400 years, celebrate Parliament almost burning down. We couldn't be asked that it actually happened. If you're looking for where power resides in the South African society, it is I think inaccurate to think it is concentrated in politics. We are different as a society, and for what it's worth, in my personal experience, I worked for the DA for a few months in 2023 as head of the communications in Gauteng. It was 5 months, but it felt a hell of a lot longer. Um, and as I said to one of my politician friends, you guys are better in government than in person. I didn't like it. I don't think it was an especially pleasing experience for myself or my employers. Um, but what is insane to me is that since I left the DA, I have more access to important decision makers within the party than I had when I worked for the party. It's we shouldn't overestimate what it is, what the dynamism could be, what the benefit is of being an analyst on the sidelines
Mm,
with an ability to perhaps whisper in an ear, gain a meeting, speak to a minister, make sure that a senator or a secretary of state see our research.
mm,
That politics isn't just formal politics. It's far wider than that, and that's where the power of South Africa really lies. Is if people can understand that they participate in elections every day of their lives, they make choices about the values they support every day of their lives, then I think they would come to realize that formal politics is where politics ends up. It's
mm,
not where it begins.
yeah. Well, Herman, it has been a very, very interesting conversation, and I think I've taken up enough of your time. I also need to go. But I want to thank you for giving me the time that you give me for talking about this bill. I really do wish the IRR the best of luck with this bill. I'm going to keep a close eye on you guys and see where this goes, and hopefully you'll also be back on the show and we can talk about updates or progress or anything like that anytime when you have that information. Can you do me a favor? I'm going to be a bit cheeky. Anthea Jeffrey knows me.
Yes.
We've met once or twice. I hope she remembers me. She signed the book, which was very sweet of
Yes.
her. Any chance you can put a good word in for me so I can have her on the show? I'd love to have her on the show.
Sure. Yeah, it's tough. It's tough. We are busy people. No, of course, Joe. No, it's been a pleasure, and
Okay.
I'll relate my very enjoyable experience to Anthea. Anthea is a trooper, a thinker of immense caliber. Uh, yeah, let's make a plan.
All right. Awesome. Once again, Herman, thank you so much, and again, good luck with the bill. And thank you for addressing some of the comments that we had and stuff like that. Unfortunately, I didn't get to all the questions, but again, we'll do a follow up. We'll do another show. Anything we didn't get to today or tonight, we can always talk about a bit later if anything
Thank you.
happens, anything comes up. Cool.
No, thank you, Joe, and and I do apologize for my very rambling answers. I'll work on it and be better.
No, I enjoyed your answers because you know what it you did answer a few of the questions that were already like through talking about the history, through talking about all this stuff. You did answer a lot of the questions, but there were just one or two that we missed. And again, like I enjoy the history lessons personally. Like I love the history lessons, so I enjoyed it. So, so yeah.
Brilliant.
Um, enjoy the rest of your evening, man. I'll see you soon.
You too. God bless.
Cheers. Ladies and gentlemen, that was Hermann Pretorius from the IRR. He's the man who wrote the bill. He's the man who wrote the race law. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, I'm sorry. Moon Dancer, don't go just yet. I'm going to address some of your questions. So I'm going to try and answer some of the questions myself very quickly, rapid fire. I do think that some of these questions were answered in the beginning. What legal political obstacles have historically prevented the repeal of race-based laws, and how does IRR plan to overcome them in this day and age? Well, there have been. I think we discussed this with Martin. Actually, there have been race laws that have been repealed, but the issue is that the ANC keeps on implementing new race laws, and those race laws are not being challenged, and they haven't been challenged, and this is pretty much the first time that they're going to be challenged and taken away. Ever since the race index has come out and people have seen that there's 142 active race laws, now is the time to fight it, which is part of what Herman said at the beginning. What strategies is the IR employing to ensure broad public and political support for the bill, given past resistance to similar initiatives? Once again, not really, hasn't really been done before, per se. But from what I can see with the IRR at the moment, it's just about getting people to know about the bill, signing the petition. I think that's where they're focusing on now, is signing the petition, getting as much signatures. Once again, the link is in the description to sign the signature, to sign the petition. Please go and do so. And I think that's their focus, to build the awareness, build the amount of people to support it, and with that, they have leverage. And I'm paraphrasing heavily again what Herman has already said. And then how does the RR plan to counter opposition from political parties and interest groups and benefit from race-based legislation? Well, that's going to be the challenge. But as Herman said, this is a marathon, not a sprint. So who knows, even in 3 years, where and what position the ANC will be in. Maybe the DA will be stronger. Maybe the DA will support the bill and push it through. Maybe other parties in Parliament will support the bill and help push it through. There's a lot of ways that this can happen. So only time will tell. But right now, we got to build some support for it. How does IRR respond to arguments that race-based policies are necessary for economic transformation? Herman also addressed that, basically, that they only help an elite group. They don't help the poor, and this is evident because ANC has had these policies in place for many years, and we still have a huge poverty class. What are the potential economic and social consequences of abolishing race-based laws in South Africa? I personally don't think that there are consequences. I think it's going to be beneficial because, once again, these policies like BEE and employment equity and all that stuff hinder growth. But to start hiring people based on merit will make all the difference. So, yeah, I think the economy will grow. I think people will be happier. And I think the middle class will start growing and thus taking people out of poverty. Moon Dancer, I hope you're still here. What happens if the ANC refuses to hand over power and they have the army at their command? They could suppress the other parties like Mugabe did. So luckily we have a robust civil society amount of groups and organizations that can draw international attention to that. But also, I wouldn't worry about the army. If you've seen some of my recent videos on the army has like 6 planes. Most of them don't work. So they have like, let's say they had 60 planes, helicopters, airplanes, jets, whatever. Of that, they only have 6 left. The rest don't work. Same with the tanks. Same with the ships, the Navy. There's, I think, 1 ship left or something, or 2 ships left. The army in South Africa is dismal. It's really in its moor. The ANC is not taking care of the army. Literally, if we went to war with any country right now, we would literally be screwed. We don't have an army. And even the lieutenant general of the army, Sandef, was on stage. Don't remember what event. I did a video on this as well. And he said he literally looked at the politicians and he said, you guys wanted a monkey defense force or something like that, or circus defense force or something like that. And lieutenant general is saying that. So yeah, we sorry to break it to you, we don't have an army. Literally, I think the US, if they wanted to, could literally just send 1 drone and we'd be screwed. That's how bad it is. And that's the reality. I saw that you responded to someone else and said, yeah, but we still have a few tanks and can call the Defense Force SAPs. I guess we can all call our private security. So private security would probably help us, but there's a very important video coming out tomorrow morning about private security. ANC is attacking it. It's really alarming. You guys need to watch that video tomorrow morning about private security. I think the ANC is attacking it, started a war on it. But to address your SAPs thing and all that stuff, like at the end of the day, we saw what happened with the July riots, how SAPs were inefficient, how the civilians had to step in. I really do think that the army wouldn't be able to. We saw the army during lockdown as well. They were useless. They went into Mitchell's plane and Mitchell's plane robbed them. The army with guns. There was headlines that said Mitchell's plane robbed the army and their weapons at gunpoint. Knife point. So we really don't have an army. And what mechanisms does the IRR propose to ensure fair opportunities for all South Africans without relying on racial classification? Well, the bill does away with the racial classifications, and they want the country to focus on merit. And again, Herman did touch on that. Yeah, I think that's most of the questions. Let me just see. Unfortunately, okay. Sorry, but the answers are either a hit or a miss, and so far I am hearing nothing of how the bill will be passed. I think the takeaway there, because this is very important, is patience, and it's a marathon. This is not something that is the IR is not going to send the bill to Parliament tomorrow. They need support, they need signatures, they need leverage. And then from there, they're probably going to get politicians, because once what Herman was trying to say is, once you have an idea and that idea spreads and you get more support for that idea and the public is talking about it and talking about it to the point and supporting it to the point where the politicians can't ignore it, some politicians start buying into that idea. You get the DA on board, you get Freedom Front Plus on board, you get some other parties on board that align with this idea. That's when because again, that's what Herman was trying to say. The ANC is not going to be at 40% forever. They're declining. They're going to continue to decline. Other parties are going to grow. And if you get other parties on board with the idea and they outnumber the ANC, bill goes through. Change happens. But you need to start at ground level. And you need to start getting people talking about it. It's a battle of ideas. And I think that's what Herman was trying to say. That's how it's going to happen. It unfortunately doesn't happen quick. It's not an overnight fix. But again, if we don't try, well, then we've already been defeated. And I think on that note, I'm going to leave. Hold on, Chris Ellis, thank you for tuning in. Are you going to be joining Rob Hersoff's endeavor? He was on my show. We did have a conversation about that. Yes, I will be. Very excited. I'm not going to say too much. Everything is hush hush at the moment, but it is in the works. It is happening. Very exciting things to come. I was actually part of a meeting today with some of the people who are building it and investors and stuff like that. And very, very, very awesome meeting. And yeah, very excited. Very, very excited. All I will say is this endeavor that Rob is doing, it's happening. There's no stopping it. And I think a lot of us are very excited to announce, although Rob's kind of officially announced it, but there's sort of, but there will be an official announcement pretty soon. And yeah, you'll hear it. You'll hear it when it happens. Cool. Ladies and gentlemen, I've got to go. Thank you all so much for watching. Thank you. Please share this. Please sign the petition. And yeah, thank you for the support. Become a member, please. Goes a long way to supporting the channel and helping me produce content. And proud. It doesn't interrupt the guests. I do interrupt sometimes, but yeah, I do like my guests to talk. That's why they're on the show. Anyway, there you go. Thank you guys once again for watching. It really means a lot to me. Thank you for all the new subscribers. Thank you for all the new members. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. I really enjoy making content for you. Don't forget to check out the Newsflash episode tomorrow morning. Very, very important. And please share it far and wide and share this stream far and wide. And once again, thanks for all the support. Thanks for the super chats, Sasa chats. It is greatly appreciated. With all that being said, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for watching. I will see you at the next one.